Hey guys, it's Shadowswolm, and I'm here to present to you guys the new free week champion rotation for the preseason of 2014, week 2. That is this week. As always, I'm going to just run down the list, tell you guys how many games against the bots I feel you guys should play, with these champions in order to just understand how they play, and just how they, how their abilities interact with each other, and as well as just standard item build for those champions. So let's just look at the champions and go on, shall we? So this week we have Malphite, Sivir, Taric, Misfortune, Lux, Cassiopeia, Wukong, Talon, Nautilus, and Aatrox. So let's start off with Malphite and just, again, work our way down. Malphite, he's very, very good for being a tank. Most of these champions I've, played, and I agree with the roles they say, except for Taric. Support, yes. Fighter, no. He's more of a tank. But that's besides the point. So, Malphite's definitely good at what he's, put in the game to do. His passive gives him a shield that is equal to 10% of his current health, or 10% of his maximum health, rather. And it refreshes itself every 10 seconds that Malphite isn't attacked. So say the shield breaks, you go 10 seconds without being attacked, oh look, you have your shield back. So you're, later stages of the game, it's going to be like 1,000 health shield, if not more. Or, no, I'm sorry, not 1,000 health, like, 200-300 health. It's still a pretty good chunk though, giving you, just maybe pushing you over that edge between like 2,000 to 2.8 to 3K, stuff like that. So it's definitely always good. Then he has his Q, which is Seismic Shard. It tosses a slow onto whichever target you aim it at, as well as puts a dot on them, and it does initial damage, puts a dot on them, and a slow. That's always good. Then you have your W, which is Brutal Strikes. It's a 2-component ability. The first part's a passive that gives your melee attacks a cleave. The active component of it allows you to do increased physical damage, as well as increases your armor for a short duration. Your E, which is Ground Slam, it allows you to do damage in an area around you based upon your armor, as well as your AP, and your ultimate, which is Unstoppable Force. It will allow you to pretty much just negate any sort of, movable object that might be in the way, whether it be terrain, a wall from a Nivea, a pillar of filth, or a pillar of ice from Trundle, stuff like that. And it just lets you go into the fray, like right at the dead center of combat, and knock whoever's in that epicenter of the Unstoppable Force, knock them up, as well as do massive damage to them. The basic combination for Malphite in team fights is Unstoppable Force, or pop your W, which is your Crushing Blow. I just said it like 30 seconds ago and I forgot the name of it. Or Brutal Strikes, rather. You pop that, you Unstoppable Force in, then you pop your Ground Slam for just a massive damage combination, and just watch people fall left, right, and center. And then whoever's left alive that's trying to get away, you go ahead and Seismic Shard them to slow them down, do extra damage, and just, allow your teammates to catch up and kill them. The items you can expect to see on Malphite would, be standard tank items such as Warmogs or Randuins. You'd also wouldn't go miss seeing an Abyssal Scepter, because his abilities do scale with AP. The Abyssal Scepter is good just because it increases the damage of your ultimate, as well as before your ultimate does damage, the aura effect from Abyssal Scepter comes into play first, and allows your ultimate to do just that much more damage by lowering their magic resist before it does damage. So definitely good, as well as a Sunfire Cape. But as I said, the standard combination would be W into R into E into Q onto somebody. That's base standard, and then you can go ahead and fiddle around with how you want to set up your combos from there. I would recommend 2, if not more, bot games with him, just to get the feel of how he really plays out. Again, his passive, it's the game changer for him. Every 10 seconds you're not being attacked, your shield refreshes. And, say you have, let's have a good round number of 1,000 health, alright? That's very, very, ludicrously easy to get as Malphite. I think you actually get that by, level 6. So that's 100 health shield that you have. That's, 1.5 auto attacks? And then it just scales up from there. If you have 2,000 health, that's 200, that's a 200 shield. 200 health shield. So on and so forth. And it's very, very nice. It's not obscene to see a Malphite with, 3,000 health, and it seems like he has, more than that because of his shield. But, yeah, as I said, don't be surprised to see stuff like an Abyssal Scepter on him and a Sunfire Cape, because both are very good for him, and they synergize very well with his kit. Next we have Sivir, who, she's just a beast since they changed her. Her passive, I believe every time she attacks a champion, she gets increased movement speed. Actually, let's go ahead and check that out real quick, shall we? So Sivir, her passive, Fleet of Foot. Sivir gains a short burst of movement speed while she attacks an enemy champion. So yeah, I was dead correct on that. Then we have her not even, hovering over anything else. Next we have her Boomerang Blade, which scales based upon your total AD. They didn't nerf the amounts of base damage it does, however, but they scaled it with your total AD instead of your base. It also does damage with your AP as well, just not as much as your AD. Then we have, or actually back to the Boomerang Blade, it does damage, obviously since it says Boomerang, it does damage on the way out and on the way back. It can actually be set up really, really good to snipe a champion that's trying to run away that's very low on health, and they just move the wrong way, or you move the right way. Then you have Ricochet, which has 2 components, one that I'll talk about in another minute or two, but the base mechanic of Ricochet, it has 3 charges now instead of the previous 1, and it can pretty much bounce indefinitely as long as there are enough targets. It cannot hit the same target more than once. So, it's good when you're trying to, clear giant creep wave, for instance, because that'll just bounce to everything it possibly can. Then you have your Spell Shield, and no longer costs mana to cast. It does still have that long cooldown, but it does not have the, cost of you spending mana to get mana back, but it gives you less mana back than it previously did. Then you have your ultimate, which, let's actually hover over it right here. On the Hunt. Sivir leads her allies in battle, granting them a surge movement speed for a period of time. Additionally, passively grants Sivir bonus attack speed while Ricochet is active. So going back to that Ricochet buff, or Ricochet, the second part of it that I was talking about just a minute ago. So, right there, Sivir gets bonus movement speed when she pops that and gives that to her allies. And then while she has Ricochet active, she gains bonus attack speed. So it's a twofold, her ult's twofold and Ricochet's kind of twofold in that sense as well. But expect to see items that are very standard, such as Infinity Blade, or Infinity Edge rather, Bloodthirster, maybe a Blade of the Rune King. Those are definitely pretty standard items for Sivir. I would recommend 1, if not 2, bot games to just get, her timing right, or get the angles on that Boomerang Blade right in order to, how to correctly set those up. If you want to just get very, very good at her Spell Shield, because it does last about 3 seconds, so if you pop it at the wrong time, it can give your enemies that note of, hey, don't attack me just yet with spells, wait until this is over, because that's a 15-second cooldown I have to wait for. So, if you want to get really good with that, I recommend more than just 2 bot games. I would go with maybe 4 or 5, so that we can get kind of good with, how the Spell Shield, can be toggled at the very last second before a spell really hits you, such as, Fizz Ultimate or, something along that line. But, yeah, definitely expect to see standard items on her. And maybe get, you might see a Trinity Force on her. Maybe. Don't hope for it, though. Next, we have Taric, who, very good support and actually kind of tanky for support. Of the supports, he's one of the tankier. There's also Blitzcrank and Leona, with all three of them being pretty tanky and very good supports in their own right. But Taric, I feel more so because he can actually heal. Now, Taric's passive, they did change him. I'm gonna go ahead and click on him. Gonna just do this that way I don't mess up and we all see exactly what's going on here. So they did change Taric's passive, Gemcraft. After casting a spell, Taric's next basic attack deals bonus magic damage based on his armor and reduces his cooldowns. So there you go, that's his passive, Gemcraft. His Q, which is his heal, which we'll see right here, Taric brings forth earth and energy to heal an ally or himself. This heal is more potent when Taric heals only himself. What happens here is with Imbue, when he goes ahead and pops that on an ally, he heals the ally as well as heals himself for a fraction of what he healed his ally for. When he heals himself, he gains both benefits. His W, which is his Shatter, it gives him increased armor, that's the passive component of it at least. The active of it, I'll actually show you guys right down here. The passive, Taric's Gemstones increase his armor by 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. Additionally, nearby allies gain 12% of Taric's armor. That's 12% of your total armor. And then the active component of it, Taric shatters his armor, dealing 40, 80, 120, 160, 200 plus 20% magic damage to all nearby enemies and reducing their armor by 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 for 4 seconds. And Taric loses his portion of his bonus armor all of his bonus armor while Shatter is on cooldown. Next you have Dazzle, which I don't even need to tell you about. We all know it. I'll just, give you the short little blurb. So Taric fires Prismatic Sphere at an enemy, stunning them for 1.2 seconds all the way up to 1.6 seconds, depending on where they are from him. The shorter distance they are from him, the less the stun, or the shorter the stun lasts. The further away they are, the longer it lasts. And deals a set amount of damage plus, percentage of his AP. It does increase damage the further away the opponent or the closer it is from him. So, Dazzle's damage increases the closer Taric is to the target. And you want to try and find that sweet spot between max damage versus max stun. That sweet spot of 1.4 stun duration with that 100 with the 200 damage or 100 damage component. So it's, or rather the 200 damage component, because right here is the stun damage or whatever. I'm getting myself confused. Back on track. You want to find that sweet spot between max stun duration, max damage. You want to find that sweet spot of just in between. If you have to, go for max stun versus max damage. Then your ultimate, which is Radiance. You slam your hammer into the ground, you do a massive amount of damage, and for the next 10 seconds, you grant 30, 50, 70 AD and AP for your ally, or for yourself, and half for your allies. So that's a max level that is 35 AD and AP for your allies. Not bad. For him, I wouldn't be surprised to see somebody just full on stacking armor. Get Thornmail, get Sunfire Cape, etc. But expect to see at least, a Sunfire Cape and some AP, just because that's how he's scaled. That's what you want as Taric. I would say at least one, maybe two bot games to just understand how the stun mechanic works. That's the wonkiest ability that he has that you have to master. Other than that, you should be fine. Then we have Misfortune, who she's very, very good. You guys know her, you hate her or love her depending on which side of the field you play on. If you're playing with her, you love her. If you're playing against her, you hate her. Or vice versa, if you're playing against her, you love her because you know how to counter her, or generally the opponents are bad with her. Or if you're playing with her and you hate her, generally the teammate's bad with her. But her passive gives her increased movement speed. Her Q, it's very wonky on how that one works. So how her Q works, I believe it's Double Up, the name of it. I'm just going to go ahead and click on all these just to clear up any confusion on ability names. So her Double Up, it goes ahead and hits a target, for a set amount of damage, and then hits a target behind or next to it for an even more amounts of damage. It'll do base damage to one target and then increase damage to another. Generally speaking, it's good to try and get a double kill with it, but don't try and always go for that. Next you have Impure Shots, which it's a two-part ability as well. It's got a passive and an active component. The passive increases the damage dealt to the target with each strike, and the active, it increases your attack speed and lowers the healing they receive, as well as applying that increased damage. Then you have Make It Rain, which throws down a bunch of cannonballs just like Gangplank's ult, but in a shorter radius, or smaller radius, as well as slowing down the enemies, for a far greater percentage. Then you have your ultimate, which is Bullet Time. We've all seen it. It's a giant cone. Don't stand in that if you're playing against her. I mean, what else is there to say about her other than expect to see very, 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 standard AD items on her. Bloodthirster, Infinity Edge, maybe a Blade of the Rune King, depending on who she's playing against. A Black Cleaver wouldn't go amiss either. Stuff like that. Expect all of those things on her. And I would say maybe 1 to 2 games on her. Other than that, you shouldn't need more than 2. Next we have Lux, who's good for both either support or in the mid. Support Lux, very, very, very good for that shield barrier. Which kind of redundant that's named shield barrier, but whatever. But, you're pretty much, it's going to be very, very simple. If you're playing mid, you're going full AP. If you're playing support, you're going to go more support-ish items, such as a Shirelia's Reverie, for instance. But you'll still get relatively same items. You'll go similar builds, just different paths of getting to that build. If you're playing in the mid with her, again, full-blown AP, your basic combo is going to be E into Q into R, and then with your, pop your W. For those of you who don't know how, what those are, your E is your Lucent Singularity. That's the ability you toss out that goes ahead and slows enemies within that range, or within the radius, rather. It slows them down, and if they're within that radius, when the Lucent Singularity pops, they take damage. And the Lucent Singularity, most of the time, will allow you to go ahead and get your Light Binding out, which will go ahead and snare them inside of Lucent Singularity for increased damage. And then while they're binded with Light Binding, you go ahead and pop your ult, which is Final Spark, and oh look, that's just pure, that's quick burst damage, and it's very good. Ooh, excuse me. Then, her passive, which is Illumination. Every time Lux's damaging spells charge the target with energy for 6 seconds, Lux's next attack ignites the energy, dealing bonus magic damage depending on Lux's level to the target. Pretty much when you're at level 5, if you have level 3 of Lucent Singularity and, you have a decent amount of AP, like 30 AP, you can actually go ahead and Lucid Singularity onto the caster minions, have it pop, and then just auto-attack and kill all of them. It's literally that simple. But, or Prismatic Barrier, I'm sorry, not Shield Barrier. But yeah, your Prismatic Barrier, it's the only ability that actually helps your allies other than just slowing down your enemies or, rooting them for a second or so. Prismatic Barrier, every time you throw that, it has, goes out just like Sivir's Boomerang Blade and then comes back to you. It can hit your allies twice. However, the shield does not stack upon itself. It only refreshes itself. Meaning, if the shield says it absorbs 200 damage, it'll absorb 200 damage on its way out, and then, if it hasn't absorbed anything, it'll just be that 200. If it's absorbed stuff, then it'll refresh back up to that 200. So, there you go. As support, you're generally going to be building, again, support items, but your ability build will be different versus mid. As mid, you'd focus more on Light Binding and Lucent Singularity, whereas support, it's more Prismatic Barrier and Light Binding. You might get more Prismatic Barrier, might get one in Light Binding, one in Lucent Singularity, then dump the rest into Barrier. And then kind of like flip-flop between Light Binding and Singularity. But you always are going to get that ultimate at the, whatever level, 6, 11, and what is it, 15? But yeah, you're always going to get your ultimate at the respective levels. Mind you, her Q is a skill shot, Light Binding is a skill shot. Your ult, it's a front, just a full-on line attack. Just like Ezreal's, just like other champions, except there's a set range on yours. And, it's easier to move out of the way of it because it's, oh hey, move left or right, or just kind of be at that max range of it. Whereas, say with Draven's ult, it's okay, you can kind of change where you're going with it, and with Ezreal, it's just, okay, move out of the line. So, this, it's just, hey, be out of its max distance, or, step left or right. It does have a decent width, though, so be careful about that. It is relatively deceptive. Next, we actually have Cassiopeia, who is a champion I'm not very familiar with, so let's just go to this page, shall we? I'm just going to run down what I know before even hovering over her abilities. I know her passive. Every time she casts a spell, it now, like her other spells, cost a percentage less, stacking up to a cap. I'll be like half off. Let's see. After casting a spell, any subsequent spell casts will cost 10% less mana for 5 seconds. Effective stacks up to 5 times. So yeah, 50% less cost for your spells, it's not bad. She's another champion where, she's just like Karthus in the sense of you're going to be spamming your Q, which is your Noxus Blast. You're going to be spamming that lock, because it has the same kind of cooldown as Karthus' Lay Waste. You're going to spam it a lot, and you're going to have, a lot of mana when you go ahead and get that, Tear of the Goddess. Then your W, which is your Miasma, it goes ahead and lays down a small little pool that expands gradually over time, and enemies that are caught within it take damage, and they're also slowed, and the longer they're in it, the more and more it just refreshes upon itself. Then you have your E, which is Twin Fang. It's just like Urgot's ability where, not Urgot's ability, it's kind of like Anivia's Frostwing, where, you can hit anybody with it, but enemies that are, poisoned from your Miasma or your Noxus Blast, it refreshes the cooldown of Twin Fang. Yeah, Cassiopeia lets loose a damaging attack at her target. If the target is poisoned, the cooldown of the spell is refreshed. So yeah, she can cast that very, very, very quickly. And then her ult, which is Petrifying Gaze. If you're looking at her, you're going to get stunned. If you are facing away from her, you aren't going to get stunned, you will get slowed. However, enemies that are facing 2 her, they'll get stunned as well as take massive damage. Plain and simple. Again, though, actually, yeah, with her, as well as Lux, 2 to 3 games, if not more, for Cassiopeia, just due to how that scales, how her abilities scale with her passive. Then, again, expect to build stuff like an Archangel Staff that will turn into, Seraph's Embrace, expect a Rod of Ages, etc. She's one of those champions where you're just gonna go full blown, okay, either I live or I die. Plain and simple. Next we have Wukong, who I actually got to play recently in a 1-for-all. We were 5 Wukongs versus 5 Blitzcranks. We kind of slaughtered them. Wukong. What to say about him? Let's just look at him, shall we? His passive, Stone Skin, increases Wukong's armor and magic resistance for each nearby enemy champion. I'm not exactly sure of the number. We don't really need to know the number. No, that's all you really need to know. Then next you have your Q, which is Crushing Blow. Wukong's next basic attack deals additional physical damage, gains range, and reduces the enemy's armor for a short duration. Then you have your W, which is your Decoy. Wukong becomes invisible for a second and a half. An uncontrollable decoy is left behind that will deal magic damage to all enemies near it after a second and a half. So kind of like Shaco's Deceive, except you actually gain an extra, your decoy does a little magic damage when it goes, when it disappears. Then you have your Nimbus Strike. Wukong dashes towards a target enemy, sends out an image to attack up to 2 additional enemies near his target, dealing physical damage to each enemy struck. Okay, plain and simple, this is your bread and butter to help clear waves or to catch up to enemies. Then you have your Cyclone, which, think of Garen's spin to win mechanic, except this one knocks up. And you gain movement speed during the duration. So, yeah. And it also does stack stuff like Black Cleaver and any sort of, something like that puts a stacking debuff on your target. But definitely, Black Cleaver doesn't go amiss on him. A Ravenous Hydra doesn't go amiss either due to Nimbus Strike, etc. But, yeah. He's definitely one of those where you want to go ahead and build, enough tanky items such as at least a Sunfire Cape, and then go for more damagey items with Sustain. Again, the Ravenous Hydra, maybe a Bloodthirster, maybe an Infinity Edge, maybe. I wouldn't recommend it. I would go for maybe a Randuin's Omen at that point. You're not there to, get the high crits, you're just there to sustain. You're there to be the beef in, you're just there to be the meat shield. That's all you're there for, and to do the damage. Then next we have Talon, who I don't even need to look at actually I kind of do for the ult name. But, Talon, what can we say about him? Well, first of all, his passive, just look at this. Mercy. Talon deals 10% more damage with his basic attacks to any target that is slowed, stunned, immobilized, or suppressed. So meaning if they're ulted by Malzahar, if they're slowed, by, say, a Lux, Lucent Singularity, if they're stunned by something, if they're, whatever, if they're CC'd in any way, shape, or form except for fear, you do 10% more damage to them. That's dope. Next you have Noxian Diplomacy. Talon's next basic attack deals bonus physical damage. If the target is a champion, they will bleed, taking additional physical damage over a period of time and revealing their location for the duration. However, it doesn't work, if enemy actually goes full-blown stealth. If they're going to the brush, then it reveals them, but if they're somebody like, say, Twitch or Shaco that go invisible because, Shaco deceives or whatever, you can't see them. Next you have your Rake, which goes ahead and slows or slows the enemies down in a cone, it does damage on the way out as well as on the way back. So that, that goes really well with his Mercy. But yeah, it does moderate damage on the way out and moderate damage on the way back. And then you have your Cutthroat. Talon instantly appears behind his target, silencing them and amplifying his damage against that target. The amplification's only for a swing, I believe. But yeah, that's still good. And then you have Shadow Assault, where you go ahead and toss out a bunch of daggers and you go stealth mode. And while you're while you toss those daggers out, they go ahead and do damage. On the way back to you, they do damage. Pretty much your combo for Talon would be, Cutthroat into, or Noxian Diplomacy first, Cutthroat, Rake, ult, hopefully they're dead. If not, hopefully your Noxian Diplomacy's up again. Now, with Talon and Wukong, you would not build any AP items. Talon does not benefit from AP whatsoever. Wukong does, only for his decoy. That's the only thing he benefits from with AP. With both of them, you're going to obviously build AD, as I just said. I would recommend 2 to 3 games with both of them. If not more for Talon, just to understand how his ult really works and how the mechanics for, Cutthroat and Noxian Diplomacy work. But yeah, he's just good in general. He's one of those champions where you actually will maybe get an Infinity Edge. Definitely at least a Phage. Worst comes to worst, you'd get a Trinity Force just for the Phage, for the Sheen and for the Phage effects. The effects from that Zeal, they're just bonus. But yeah, you don't generally build AP on Talon. Again, maximum would be that Trinity Force. Next we have Nautilus, who he's very, very strong. We have him right here. And I haven't played Nautilus in I don't know how long. I think when he was free like a year and a half ago was the last time I played him, and I sucked. So I don't plan on playing him until I actually buy him and then play him against bots, which I do with any new champion that I haven't played ever or in a long time. So let's just read his abilities, shall we? His passive, which is Staggering Blow, knocks his basic attacks, deal bonus physical damage, and immobilize his targets. This effect cannot happen more than once every few seconds on the same target. So meaning you can attack, one champion A, B, C, D, and E, all different, all one at a time, and they'll each get that Staggering Blow on them. So that's always good. Next, you have your Dredge Line, which it's a 2-part ability. The first part, you go ahead and toss that, if it catches a wall or a building, it pulls you to that wall or building. If it catches an enemy, it goes ahead and brings you and the enemy halfway to each other so that you can actually hit them. Plain and simple. And if you miss and don't hit anything but the ground, you miss and don't hit anything but the ground. Then you have your W, which is Titan's Wrath. Nautilus surrounds himself with dark energies, gaining a shield that blocks incoming damage. While the shield persists, his attacks apply a damage over time effect to enemies around his target. Not bad. That scales off of AP, as does Dredge Line, I believe. Then you have your E, which is Riptide. Nautilus slams the ground, causing the earth to explode around him in a set of 3 explosions. Each explosion deals damage and slows enemies. And that also scales with AP. Then you have your ult, which is Depth Charge. Nautilus fires a shockwave into the earth that caches an opponent. If I even pronounced that one correctly. This shockwave rips up the earth above it, knocking enemies into the air. When it reaches the opponent, the shockwave erupts, knocking up his target into the air and stunning them. So any enemy that's caught within that line, or within that the line from the depth, where the depth charge is, all the way to where it connects, they get knocked into the air, which that's always good. So if your enemies are in a line, go ahead and toss that on the furthest enemy, and everybody gets knocked up, and they yell at him. Or they all yell at each other, and you kind of have a laugh. But, for Nautilus, I would say you're going to see more AP-centric items than anything else. I mean, you'll still see health. You won't see any AD items unless it's just LOL AD Nautilus to go for, the lulz. But, stuff just like Malphite, an Abyssal Scepter, a Sunfire Cape, they don't go amiss on him at all. And, don't expect him to be, 200-300 AP, maybe mid to low hundreds. Maybe also get a Crystal Scepter. That would be the extent on AP, I would say. But, definitely play, a couple of games versus bots as him to just understand how he plays. Understand how his depth charge really works, dredge line, how everything synergizes. And then we have Aatrox, who still can be pretty OP if known how to play correctly. So let's just look at Aatrox because he's a little difficult for me to explain without looking at his abilities. So his passive Bloodwell. When using an ability that costs health, Aatrox stores the self-inflicted damage into the Bloodwell. Upon taking fatal damage, aka he dies, Aatrox extracts the blood from the well and recovers it as health over a brief duration. Additionally, Aatrox gains 1% attack speed for every 2% blood that is in the well. So it's a 2-part passive. One, it's a 5-minute, hey, I'm not gonna die. Second, it's, oh my god, it's a pseudo steroid. Then we have Dark Flight. Aatrox takes flight and slams down at a target location, dealing damage and knocking up enemies at the center of the impact. Now, you'll see two different reticules when you're popping this ability. One is a very small one, that's the center of the impact. The other one, it's very, just a little further out, and enemies within that still take a little damage and get slowed. So, you obviously want people to get knocked up. Next, you have Bloodthirst / Blood Price. This is a 2-part ability as well. When toggled on, Aatrox deals bonus damage every third subsequent attack at the expense of his own health. That's for Blood Price. And for Bloodthirst, while toggled off, Aatrox restores health every third subsequent attack. The cool thing about this ability is it doesn't matter. You can have Bloodthirst up for 2 swings, then switch over to Blood Price and get that bonus get that bonus damage off. Or vice versa, you can have Blood Price up for 2 swings, switch over to Bloodthirst for the third, gain health back. So it's very different ability. It's one of the only abilities where you can actually do something like that. Next, you have Blades of Torment. Aatrox unleashes the power of his blade, damaging all enemies hit and slowing them. That right there isn't enough to justify how to explain it. His E, which again, Blades of Torment, it's kind of a cone, and it sends out 2 different lines. However, enemies can only be hit by one of those lines. They cannot be hit by both at the same time. If they do, they will only take damage from one of them. So, yeah. And then your ultimate, which, is Massacre. Aatrox draws in the blood of his foes, damaging all nearby enemies, or nearby enemy champions around him, and getting increased attack speed and bonus attack range for a short duration. This right here is what makes Aatrox Aatrox. You might be like, oh no, it's his Q, it's his E. No, just let's go down here. Massacre. Aatrox draws in the blood of his foes, dealing 200, 300, 400, plus 100% AP magic damage to all nearby enemy champions around him, increasing his attack speed by 40, 50, 60% depending on the level, and gaining 175 attack range for 12 seconds. Now, the attack range okay, that just makes his sword bigger, which makes him attack from further, but that turns off any ability or any items such as, cleave, for instance. But you don't really need that cleave because you're just going to be a monster for that duration. However, his abilities are better. His abilities scale off of AD. You do not, I repeat, do not want to build AP on Aatrox. Yes, his ult scales on a 1-to-1 ratio, however, everything else scales with AD, so you're better off just building AD anyway. And you also want to build a little bit of health in there. He's one of those champions where, again, just like Wukong, a Ravenous Hydra does not go amiss at all. Ravenous Hydra is almost your friend as Aatrox. Ravenous Hydra, Bloodthirster, both very, very useful items as Aatrox. There will be times where you have Bloodthirster stacked to full, and you barely have any, health past your base, and you're just going to laugh at everybody because you have Bloodthirst going, and you're just, never dying. Because they just can't kill you with how much lifesteal you have between Bloodthirst and Bloodthirster. And then there'll be other times where you're just like, lol, I have so much health, it doesn't matter. But, yeah, I would say for him as well as Nautilus, Nautilus I said 2 to 3 games, Aatrox 2 to 3 games as well, if not more, just to understand exactly how that Bloodwell works and how his abilities synergize together and how to get the timing correct for that blood price and Bloodthirst. Because you can actually switch between them at will. It doesn't cost you anything to switch between them. And the only way to get the blood up in your blood pool or blood well is to cast your Q and your E, your Q or I'm actually getting a little lost here. Yeah, your Q or your E, or taking damage from blood price. So be wary of that. What I recommend doing with him at least is getting Bloodthirst, leaving it at Bloodthirst, and just kind of spamming, Blades of Torment, all willy-nilly, because you'll never lose health with Bloodthirst. That's at least if you're soloing. If you're top. If you're jungle, you can go ahead and get Bloodthirst, then go Blades of Torment, and get Darklight, etc. But, he's another one of those champions where, again, I recommend at least a Sunfire Cape just for the extra health and armor. A Zephyr never goes amiss on him either for the increased attack speed, as well as the tenacity if you don't have any other, if you didn't go from Merc Treads. But, yeah, guys, I like this free week, or the champions this week for the free week rotation. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Do you like the champions for this week? Do you dislike them? Why? Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up if you liked it, thumbs down if you didn't. And, hey, subscribe if you want to see more content from me, if you want to see more stuff League related, if you want to just see me be bad at video games in general. My name is Ben Shoutazwom, and as always, I will talk to you all next time.